We are going to be doing a lot with square roots in the next little bit. So I'd like us to just practice a little bit of simplifying square roots without using a calculator. So when you are taking like the square root of 12, this can be simplified. What you want to do is think, what are two numbers that multiply to 12? And the first two that I think of are 6 and 2. But can you take the square root of 6 or the square root of 2 evenly? No. So I need to think of a different pair of numbers. What are two numbers that multiply to 12? Well, 4 times 3. Can I take the square root of either of those two numbers evenly? I can, the square root of 4. So we're going to separate these into two separate square roots. And now, what is the square root of 4? 2. So when I take the square root of the number, it comes out of the square root. But the square root of 3 is stuck in the square root. The only way to get out of a square root is to take the square root. And then once you've done that, the answer is just there. So 12 simplified is 2 square root of 3. Let's think about the number 50. Again, 5 and 10 multiply to 50, but I can't take the square root of either of those. But I can take the square root of 25, and 50 is 25 times 2. So I think of this as the square root of 25 times the square root of 2. What is the square root of 25? That's 5. So the 5 gets to come out of the square root and the 2 stays in. So 50 will simplify to 5 square root of 2. 80, that one's a little bit of a tricky one. What I see is 4 times 20. So 4 times 20, what's the square root of 4? Well, that's 2. So that's 2 square root of 20. But now I'm looking at the number 20. Isn't 24 times 5? So I can do another one of these. I have the 2 already, and then I get 2 square root of 5. And remember, all of these things are multiplied. So the square root of 80 can be simplified to 4 square root of 5. Now, of course, if you have a calculator that does these for you, that's fine. But keep in mind, if you're heading to AP Calculus doesn't allow calculators on half of their exams. So being able to do some of these a little bit quickly on your own is going to be beneficial. You're not going to see a lot of these in AP Calculus, but being able to do some of this numeracy in your head doesn't hurt. The thing that you're definitely going to have to be able to do in your head without a calculator in this class is rationalizing denominators. Now, there's a slow way and a quick way, and we'll go over both of those. So, what does rationalizing mean? It means you're not allowed to keep a square root in the denominator. So, how do we get that out of the denominator? Well, this is a fraction. And what we're going to do is we're going to multiply the denominator by the same square root that's already there. But if I multiply the bottom of a fraction by something, then I have to multiply the top by the same thing. Notice the 1 is outside of a square root and the 5 is inside of the square root. So we're going to get 1 times the square root of 5, which is the square root of 5 on the top. Now, remember with square roots, insides multiply with insides, outsides multiply with outsides. So what is 5 times 5? Down here, we're going to get the square root of 5 times 5, or 25. But what is the square root of 25? Well, the square root of 25 is 5. So that denominator will simplify to 5. And so we get square root of 5 over 5. That is how this simplifies. Let's do it again. I have 2 over the square root of 3. I'm not allowed to have the square root of 3 in the denominator. So I multiply the bottom and the top by that same square root of 3. Now on the top, I've got an inside and an outside. Those are not allowed to multiply, so we just write them next to one another, 2 square root of 3. But on the bottom, I have 2 insides. Those are allowed to multiply. What is 3 times 3? 9. But see, this is why we chose 3, because 3 times 3 is 9, and what's the square root of 3? Of 9? 3. So we get 2 square root of 3 over 3. Now, I'm hoping that by this time you've kind of noticed that all we're doing is taking the square root on the bottom, putting it on the top, and then turning the bottom into the thing without the square root. Like, I'm hoping that that's what you see here. So the long way to do this one is multiply the bottom and the top by that square root. On the top, we get the square root of 2. On the bottom, we get 2 times 2, or the square root of 4. And this will simplify to square root of 2 over 2. But if we look at the shortcut version, I'm just going to take the square root of 2 and move it to the top and write the bottom without the square root, but the same number. And that's our quick way of rationalizing. We can keep doing that. Let's look at this guy down over here. Let's do our shortcut. We've already got a 3 on the top and a 2 on the bottom, so we'll keep those where they are. We'll take the square root that's down here and we'll move it up to the top. And then on the bottom, we'll write that same number, but without the square root. So that gives us 3 square root of 3 over 6. Now this one we have one more step because insides go with insides, outsides go with outsides. Because this 3 and this 6 are both on the outside, we can think of this as the fraction 3 over 6 and reduce that to 1 over 2. So it'll be 1 square root of 3 over 2, or square root of 3 over 2 is what we would end up with. Let's try another one of those more tricky ones again. So we take the square root from the bottom and move it to the top. And then we write the bottom, same number, but without the square root. That's the shortcut for rationalizing. But again, insides cancel insides, outsides cancel outsides. This 2 and this 2 cannot cancel one another because one is in a square root and one is not in the square root. But the 10 and the 2 are outside. And what is 10 divided by 2? Well, that's 5. So this will simplify to 5 square root of 2. Last one here. This is a very common kind of question to see. We'll keep the 5 on the top. We'll bring the square root of 5 up from the bottom, and we'll write that bottom square root of 5, but without its square root. And now the outside 5 and the outside 5 on the bottom, 5 over 5 is 1. Those are going to reduce one another out, and we're left with just square root of 5. This is a very important skill. You must be able to quickly rationalize radicals without using a calculator.